subject would be, oh, the Senate. What's going on in the Senate? Well, there's
the Senate.
So it's interesting going late night in the Senate. There have been passing some different budget cuts and that kind of thing having to do with the sequester. And so they said, okay, the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, about 20% of its budget has to do with controllers, but they're going to take 60% of the cuts. So what they do is they're kind of...
Wait a minute. They're 20% of the budget, and they want to give them 60% of these cuts?
So what they want to do is like take the cuts and put them where they'll pretty much do the most damage.
Well, okay, let me take us back for a minute. The sequester is the automatic cuts that fell into place because there's no way that the budget deal was worked out between the parties.
In a way, that's even a misnomer.
Okay, now here's the.
It's not even a cut because it's like.
And all it is a slowdown and an increase in spending.
Yeah, it's a slowdown and an increase.
And it's over a 10-year period, which none of the news people really seem to reporting that $85 billion is cut not tomorrow, but over a 10-year period.
But also, it's a decrease in the increase.
Oh,
so it's
decrease
a smaller
in the increase.
It's a smaller increase. So it's basically a 2.5 off of the 4% increase or 5% increase. So basically, let's say if you had a corporation and you were to say, okay, next year we're going to spend 3% more or 4% more instead of 6% more. Okay, well, first thing we'll do is we're going to lay off all our salesmen.
Right.
And then, you know, your stock will drop and our stock dropped by 50%. I'll see what happens when you don't give us our increase, right?
Yeah.
Well, that CEO would be instantly fired.
Well, you realize this is a union tactic. This is a union tactic that's being pushed through on the government level. I know that the sequester was, there was many memos that have been released that the administration wanted the sequester to hurt the most obvious people. So things like closing the White House to tours, which I got to tell you, it's pretty low cost. Well, we closed the White House for tours. They stopped the Blue Angels from flying. They wanted to close these small airports, the towers in those airports.
Right.
And then they wanted to cut border agents. And then, of course, as notoriously as they were, they said there's teachers already fired when that we already know. We covered this before. There were no teachers tied to sequester. That was a joke, of course. And it turns out one after another of all these events that have been pushed down from the top, from the administration, are indications that they're just trying to reach out and hurt the people in the most public manner.
Well, also they want to close down Yellowstone.
Oh,
and Yosemite.
Yellowstone, Yosemite.
Well, it's kind of like, okay, let's say you're going to drive across the desert, right? And you're the car owner, you're the responsible car owner, and you've got your $20,000 car, and you go, let's see, I've got $60. I think I'll spend it on shining up the tires and getting a wax job on the car.
You mean instead of gas?
Instead of buying gas. And then you run out of gas halfway into the middle of the desert, everyone dies, and you go, well, see what happened, if I had $100 instead of $60. Yeah, but you could have put the money in gas, before you did the wax job. So I mean, it's just ludicrous. It's just a joke. And so I mean, for example, they had a budget amendment that could have avoided the whole FAA shutdown. There was $50 million in
well, I understand the FAA had their own reserve.
They had a slush
wouldn't
fund.
have had to close one tower.
No, they wouldn't have to close anything. It was a $50 million in slush fund that they wouldn't go, but that Reid blocked that amendment from going to the floor.
I wonder why.
And so, well, this is all going late at night. And Reid used the same tactics on dozens of measures in order to extract the most pain, and get the most press out of this.
Out of the sequester.
A 4% increase instead of a 6% increase, right?
Well, if you watch the press, and I kind of look down on this, you watch what's being told to us, and you just got to understand the amount of money the sequester was to begin with, $85 billion, is like maybe that was 7 weeks of the Iraqi war. So we're not talking about money that compared to $16 trillion in debt, compared to the national budget. Even the latest budget that just was released yesterday. They're talking about $1.2 trillion. I mean, $85 billion. This is more of a show, and this seems to be more of a look what the evil people have done to us.
Well, it's going to be they want to lay off the TSA.
Oh, lay off the TSA.
A third of the TSA, so they slow down the airports. Which I think they probably should lay off the TSA.
I think they should lay off the TSA. I think the TSA should not be a publicly funded organization.
Also, I think they've outlived their usefulness because, the original reason for the TSA was like people were hijacking planes, using those missiles to attack political and military.
9/11, of course.
Okay. Well, once you put good doors on the cockpit and you gave the pilots pistols, that took care of the whole thing. Now, there's no reason if someone's going to blow up a plane, they could blow up people standing in line If the plane can't be used for a missile, as a weapon, it's all insurance.
Right.
And you're saying, well, there's people in a plane that can blow them up. You can blow them up waiting in line in the airport. So the TSA, it doesn't really do anything anymore. It's they don't really need a TSA.
Well, I understand that Janet Napolitano had indicated that the TSA was going to lose so many members of its staff.
Well, that would be fine.
That all the airports would be slowed down.
I think you can you can have people sign a waiver. You don't have to wait in line. Forget about the TSA. You just get on the plane. Take your chances. I think a lot of people just sign a waiver. Fine.
Well, do you realize, Mark, if you look back when you were young and you first started flying, and I know when I was young when I first started flying, the only thing people were worried about, hijack to Cuba, and so they had very little, if any, very little security. And I remember being able to walk on a plane. You don't have to take off your clothes, go through the nude scanner, hold your head up, dance out like this, put your hands up like that, trying to get through the scanning
But I'm saying the whole point of...
I just find it, I find that appalling.
The whole point,
anything else.
The whole point on it is, now that the pilots have pistols, and now that they've got a good cockpit security, it doesn't make any difference. You don't need anyone checked.
Well, I understand that, funny enough, Janet Napolitano, after making all the speech about the slowing down of the airports...
As long as people will sign a waiver.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is that it turned out statistically the lines were actually flowing faster now because this alleged layoff of TSA, a lot of people were saying, well, maybe I shouldn't fly. Well, there's no change in the TSA manpower. So instead, the people in lines were actually going faster in both Los Angeles and New York. There was some studies on this right after she said that to see if this was really going to happen.
Right.
And what's interesting about it is, of course, it didn't happen.
And there's another thing is, like, if you're going to get inspected to go on a plane, why does it have to be a federal agency?
It doesn't.
Why can't it just be the airport can have their own security?
Well, you realize San Francisco has a private security system.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason for the TSA to be involved in any of this, I don't think.
But you know that the private security system in San Francisco is
So I think if the sequester means they have to eliminate the TSA, that's good.
Well, I'm up for that.
Yeah, I think it's just eliminated.
But what about the idea that all the federal agencies were preaching gloom and doom over this whole sequester, when in fact the gloom and doom for the sequester amount is only being targeted at really public factors?
If you want to run out of gas in the middle of the desert because you didn't buy gas because you waxed your car before you went across the desert, I think you deserve to run out of gas in the middle of the desert.
I still don't understand. Let's go back to this for a minute. Why was it that the cuts that are being pushed through, or allegedly being pushed through, are the ones that are most public? Do you have any opinion?
Well, there's a whole theory, it's like close down the Washington Monument. If you do a government cut, they want to close down the Washington Monument. They want to close down the most visible, make the most terrible thing. They're not going to make a cut in any other substantive, thing, So, but it's an operation, the opposite of a corporation. If a corporation did something, their stock would drop, right?
Of course.
The CEO would be fired. But if the government makes a big splash and goes, oh, we made a big splash, we had to shut down all these important public things because we increased 4% instead of 6%, then they get more money.
Well,
so they get rewarded.
Rewarded for failure.
They get rewarded for failure.
Well, just as an afternote on this discussion about the TSA and the airports, well, as it turns out, miraculously, there was enough money to keep all the towers operating in all the small airports that they said they were going to close. Right. They're not closing them. And miraculously, they're not laying off Border Patrol agents, a third of the agents, so that millions more people will cross the border. They're not doing that. And miraculously enough, the TSA agents say we're going to lay off. They never laid off.
Well, I think it would be. I think if Senator Reid wants to shut down Yellowstone, and he wants to shut down Yosemite, and he wants to shut down the Washington Monument and the White House, shut it down.
Okay. Well, listen. On that happy note, thanks, Mark. It's a wonderful evening on Law Talk.